Hi everyone, welcome back to Zesty Thoughts with your host Anabla. Welcome to episode 77. I hope everyone has been having a great week. I want to start off the pod by saying I'm anti-war, straight up anti-war. I'm sure everybody around the world is feeling a little bit of anxiety surrounding kind of what is going on in the Middle East. I am personally just war in general. I've never really understood it. I think it's a lazy form of diplomatic policy making and international affairs. I think it's lazy. I think it's when you can't talk it out and it has to come to that. That's a cop out to me. I think it's lazy ruling or lazy management of a country, essentially. So super anti-war. I always have been. I was raised by hippies, so you feel me. You feel me on that. I'm just praying for everybody's safety. Civilians and innocent people are gonna get hurt, and that just is really hard for me to grapple with at the end of the day, as I'm sure it is for pretty much everyone everywhere. I'm just praying that there are as little civilian casualties as possible, and as little just death as possible in general, because a lot of the military for any given country are not, it's not they're super aligned with some of these things either. They're just kind of there doing their job, and I'm sure a lot of them don't want to be doing this either. So praying for them that they can get through this unscathed and go back to their families and come back home and all that. So prayers for that. Fuck war, basically, is all I'm saying. That's my start to the pod today. On to a lighter note. I've had a really nice week. It's super windy today, so please be patient with me. I'm going to try to EQ out any background noises. The wind is loud. I've been hearing it whistle through some of my old ass windows. So if you just hear the murmur of wind in the background, please just ignore it. I'd appreciate it. So I finally watched Marty Supreme. You guys, I know I'm kind of late to the game, but I'm trying to watch all of the Oscar noms before the Oscars. And I really loved it. I don't want to speak too soon because I haven't seen Sinners yet. I don't want to just put all my eggs in one basket and be yeah, Chalamet deserves the win, because I've heard amazing things about Michael B. Jordan's performance in Sinners. So I'm going to still watch that first before I, give my hot take about who I think should win Best Actor. But I was very, very impressed by this performance. I think more so than him playing Bob Dylan. I mean, he did a great job in that film, obviously, but this just hit a little bit different. I think we all know, thematically, we all know and can relate to that feeling of defeat, redemption, personal victory. It's just a desire that's innately human. And so there was just a message in this film that I think just got it just hit more, if that makes sense. I mean, the film about Dylan was amazing. It just had a different message, and it wasn't as much of a relatable message maybe for everybody. I mean, as a musician, I think there were things in it that I could relate to, but maybe the average person wouldn't, So I really enjoyed this. Acting was great. I feel the script, the dialogue was just impeccable. Just on fire the whole film. I was very impressed by that. I was on my toes, entertained, engaged pretty much the entire film. Considering it was so long, that's also a win in my book. So I really liked it. I'm trying not to give any spoilers because I do think people should watch this. Yeah, it was really good. And I don't know, my main takeaway that it kind of made me reflect on just this idea of greatness, and this victory. Okay, I guess this is gonna be a small spoiler because I have to relate it back to the film. This idea of a victory that is meaningless. He wins a game against some world champion that he had lost to previously. and it was not like a legitimate match. And so at the end of the day, it didn't really mean anything to the world, like to the powers that be, these corporations that like host these tournaments essentially. Um, but it's kind of just like I feel like it's a very clear example of the motives behind humans' desire for victory and greatness, that sometimes we don't really care. Actually, I would argue most of the time we don't really care if it is followed by greatness, recognition, fame. Like, I mean, a lot of people do care about those things, but I think that if you're truly passionate about something and you like love it to your core, and you know that you're meant for that, and that that's what your purpose is in life, that you don't really care about it being like to society's standard of like greatness, that like you can have that gratification and that joy and that like energetic I don't know, positivity that you take away, whatever, from your skill, for example, and that it doesn't really matter what everybody else thinks. It was just a great testament to that, I guess, that if you really are passionate about something, that all of that shouldn't really matter, and that it doesn't really matter. I think it's a really nice like life lesson. It makes me reflect a lot on kind of like current times, and this like vast, like exponentially increasing desire for people to want to like be famous and wealthy, and this drive for everybody to want to be like that. I think especially about children in this circumstance, because I work with children, and, parents are doing I would say 50-50, like a fairly good job of like trying to keep their kids off of social media and away from like outside influence, to the extent that like they're comparing themselves to others that are in a completely different circumstance that they are. But, there are enough kids out there that are getting exposed to social media, and in I don't think they necessarily have the framework to understand that that's like not the full picture. Like adults, we understand like what you put on social media is like only a small percentage of what your reality is like. But kids don't fully understand that concept, up until a certain age, they don't. And I think it's so important that messages like that, although this film is like obviously not kid friendly, I think it's like a important like message to remember at the end of the day, and to be reminded of, that like being famous and like having this like legitimized by society's standards like win or whatever, and like this fame and this fortune, that can be the goal for some people. Totally, that's fine, but it's not sustainable for everybody. That's not for everybody, and it shouldn't be everybody's goal as a human to like reach that level of whatever notoriety, and it's just not for everybody. Like straight up, there's no possible way for everybody to achieve that. And it's like kind of that, like maybe not like a rude awakening, but I think it's like a good message to put out there, that you don't have to get that to be happy. You don't have to, in essence, like there are people that genuinely are like, I need to be famous. Like I want this out of life, and then they become famous and they're happy and they love it. And it's like, that's fulfilling to them. But that might not be fulfilling to everybody. And that's like, okay. There's this like kind of rat race in society that lifestyle is like the epitome of like a good life lived. I think there is an aspect to that like lifestyle that's like really, really glamorized. And there are some pieces of media like documentaries and things that show the dark sides of it. But I think not enough. I think it gets glamorized more so than it gets like criticized in a public light. And I think at the end of the day that like balance is always key. I always say that, you guys, that's like my motto, one of my mottos in life, and that we need to have media that reminds us that like that's not the most important thing in life. It may be for some people and that's okay, but it doesn't have to be for you, right? There is this like weird pressure that society and social media is putting on a lot of people, that like everybody has to be like an influencer, that everybody has to, you know, make money online, and that everybody has to like participate in this rat race, like whatever you want to call it. And I do think it's really important that we have media that shows otherwise. Now, I may be like reading super far into that message, but at least that's like what I took away from it, was that like, wow, it didn't even matter that his win was illegitimate. It was like the single most satisfying moment for him. And it didn't even matter that like no one gave a fuck, that like no one cared. And obviously the people, like for this specific example, obviously the people in Japan were going to be like heartbroken, and it was just like the worst, you know, L for them as a country in the context of this film. But that to him, it just like didn't even matter. Like he didn't care, and it was still the most satisfying thing for him. It just was, you know, a testament to his skill and all his hard work, and every moment that he spent up to that moment, working on something that he really cared about. So I really think it was a beautiful film. If you can look at it from that perspective, I think it's very satisfying. And like, I haven't seen a lot of the others. Like I said, I need to see Sinners and a few others, but this message to me was like very personally gratifying. And yeah, I would say like it's an interesting film. Like I said, dialogue is very like entertaining. I think the average person would enjoy it. I mean, I feel like they kind of err on the side of like trying to make him like unlikable, but it didn't work. I think as an audience member, I was kind of rooting for him the whole time for some reason. I don't know why. There was like this charm that was just like deeply embedded in his like his charisma in the film. And at the end of the day, you're always going to be rooting for the underdog in any form of like art as an audience member. So I don't know, I really enjoyed it. So I highly recommend you guys watch it. It's beefy though. It's like 2.5 hours. So buckle in. Okay. This week, you guys, I've gone on a little deep dive. I guess today's pod is going to be like 2 large segments. I don't really have any like little things to gab about, but these 2 things, like Marty Supreme and Antarctica, are like my 2 main topics for today's pod. So this whole week have been going on like YouTube documentary deep dives, right, about Antarctica, because I saw this like one like short or something, or like a reel that was like talking about fun facts about Antarctica. And I realized that like I knew some stuff, but like I'd never really gone deep into like geography or the history or like the reality of like what is going on there, right? Because it's so elusive. Like it's pretty much only like scientists that are down there doing research, and I'm like, what are they researching? Okay, so I wanted to read some fun facts. I've been watching like videos and compiling these all week, but I also have just like a summary on Google that, you know, it's going to sum up some very interesting facts that like some of these I did know, and some of these I personally did not know. And I'm like just finding out. And I'm like low-key, like, wait, I'm in my Antarctica era. So I just want to share some of these facts. So Antarctica, for those of you that like might know this, it's like something that I assumed. So this fact wasn't very shocking to me, but it is the coldest place on the planet, not the North Pole. It's the South Pole. It does hold the record for the lowest temperature ever recorded on Earth, which is negative 128.6 degrees Fahrenheit. For those of you that are in the Celsius gang, 89.2 degrees Celsius, negative, below zero. Like what? I've never even, to be honest, I've never even been in negative temperatures. I've been in like 20 degrees. I think maybe the lowest temperature I've actually ever felt, I was in Colorado for a wedding in winter, like in January at one point, I think it was. And it was maybe like 13, 19 degrees. I don't know. It was like in the tens, right? I've never felt anything less than that. I mean, that was like, I'll be honest, that was like not as bad as I thought it was going to feel, because I was like layered up. I was prepared. But I can't imagine like 20 something degrees colder than that, just like straight up like 0 degrees. Can't imagine that. But 128 below, girl, I don't know. That's like actually insane, which explains why like there's obviously like no human inhabitants there. Like they wouldn't be able to survive. It's giving frostbite. It's mostly like whales, seals or sea lions, I think seals, and like penguins and like krill and fish. You know, that's like pretty much the only life that's down there. It's just crazy to me. One thing that I did not know about Antarctica was that it is a desert. Okay, which is like, huh? What do you mean it's a desert? It's actually the largest desert on the planet. It's technically classified as a desert because it receives like very little rainfall. I think I was watching one video and it's like any place that's like an annual average of less than 250 millimeters, or I think they said something like that, or like less than 10 inches annually is considered a desert. Okay, like on average over decades or something. So the crazy thing is that technically it's a desert because it doesn't receive that much rainfall because of how cold the air is. Like it doesn't rain that often. But then it's like, well, then how is it like covered in ice, right? How does that like work? Basically, because of how cold it is, when it does rain and then snow technically, right? And then the snow hardens and becomes ice and it just like never melts. Because of how, like, it doesn't get warm enough for it to ever melt, ever. So apparently the ice that is there is like super, super thick and like has never melted ever, like in millions of years, which is freaking insane. It says right here, ice thickness. The ice sheet is on average over a mile thick. Huh? That's actually insane. I was watching one video talking about the thickness of the ice and like the pressure and the weight of it, and that in some areas it has pushed like the bedrock, like the actual land, like below sea level. Huh? Like that's freaking insane. So that's crazy to me. To put this in perspective, the land overall is like roughly the size of like the US and Mexico combined, okay? Which in combination makes it the largest desert. It's like 2 times the size, like double the size of the Sahara Desert, 4 or 5 times the size of Australia, and 98% of its surface is covered in ice. There's only like a very, very, very small, like 2% of the surface of the continent that does not have ice. And those areas, apparently because of like wind speeds, there's like this natural erosion, and so 2% of the land in those areas where the wind speeds are like really, really high, are not covered in ice. And it's just like barren wasteland. Like nothing can grow there because it's so cold. It's just crazy. Freshwater reservoir, it contains 70% of the world's fresh water, which is crazy. There's actually like a bunch of lakes underneath, like frozen lakes underneath the ice sheet, which is crazy. And it contains 90% of the world's ice, like straight up. All of the like cold areas of the world, like the North Pole included, like upper parts of like Russia and like areas like that where there's ice, all of that combined, 90% of the world's ice is there in the South Pole, which is like crazy to think about. It's said that if it were to melt, which is like, no, don't melt, don't do that, don't do that. If it were to melt, like all of the ice, global sea levels would rise by 200 feet, which is like, what? That's like all like beach cities, like in the whole world, all like coastal cities in the whole world would be like gone, done for. That's like 60 meters for those of you that are in the meter gang, right? It's so crazy. There's no permanent residents. Like I said, it's like all scientists, temporary people that are there. It's not like owned by any one country. There's actually kind of like a global claim to it. So any country can access it and, you know, build on it and do whatever they need to do and like do research. And then there's like a treaty that, I don't know how many countries have signed the treaty, but there is a treaty that essentially requires that anybody that does scientific research there has to like share their findings with other countries. So it's just kind of this like universal, like, okay, like we're all gonna just do research here and just share it with each other, which I hope is the case. Hopefully everyone's actually doing that, which is crazy. It is the 5th largest continent on the planet, right above Europe, which is freaking insane. I think that's like below South America and above Europe, like larger than Europe. That's crazy. Okay, this is the craziest fact to me. So their winter is between the months of like March and October, essentially, like roughly, okay? For their winter, for all of those months, it's literally like complete darkness. Complete 24-hour darkness. That's insane. Like, imagine you're a scientist doing research there. Like, it's so crazy. I was watching like one video about like shelters that they build and like the architecture and the design of the shelters that are built there. And like the issue being that like the ice never melts. So how did they make a structure that is like movable to avoid being buried, right? Because that's like been the problem in the past with less technology. A lot of these shelters that have been built temporarily for research have been buried, and like they're just like stuck. It's like, okay, can never get to it again because like it rains and snows and then it's like the ice just stays and it never melts, you know? And the amount of like power it would take to like melt it, it's just like not sustainable. Doesn't make sense, right? They've had to get really creative engineering wise and architecturally to create buildings that like are technically movable so that they can avoid it getting buried basically in the snow, which is like so crazy to think about. But one of the aspects of the doc that was talking about the interiors, and like keep in mind these are people that are like studying, they're there for months on end, they're collecting samples from the environment and they're conducting scientific research in Antarctica. Like they're not just like taking it and then leaving and going back to like whatever country they came from. They're staying there. And so there was like a psychologist that helped like pick colors, like a color psychologist that helped pick the colors for things on the interior to like create a more like positive environment, specifically because there may be people researching there when there's like a lot of darkness, which is like freaking crazy to think about, like months on end, no sunlight. So they have like alarm clocks, like it's giving hat, like alarm clocks that like simulate sunlight, you know, morning sun. And then they have like natural materials like this like oak, like these posts or something like that are built from more natural materials to simulate like nature and like trees and like being outdoors, which is crazy. It's just so insane to me. Like imagine just like being somewhere like that, so isolated for like months on end. This was the most interesting thing that like I never would have thought myself. The research that's being done there, it's not like it's just research for the geography, like the plants, the animals, the microbes. Like they're not just doing research on Antarctica. The dwellings that have been built and engineered and the architects and all of these people that have helped to build these places for humans to inhabit in like this extreme cold weather, apparently a lot of this architecture and engineering is being used to also possibly design and draw a parallel between like other planets. But it's like, oh my God, I didn't even think of that. Like, of course, they're going to pick an extreme place where we have access to easily, where humans technically can survive. And like, what kind of like generating systems do you need, and oxygen, and like all these kinds of like systems that you need to allow humans to survive indoors, right? And the fact that they're using it to learn more about like building for spacecrafts and space dwellings and like interstellar dwellings is like actually freaking insane. The lowest recorded temperature on Earth being in Antarctica around 122 to 130 essentially degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. Whereas like on a planet like Mars, which is so crazy to me that like people are legitimately like investing resources like as we speak on researching how humans can survive on Mars. Like the lowest recorded temperature there is anywhere between like 180 to 200 negative degrees Fahrenheit. And these scientists are like sharing this research on like how do we create an environment, one where like humans can survive because of the cold weather, but also like where humans like don't go insane. Like how can we create like a good psychological environment? What do they need? Do they need to have like a fitness area or like a recreational area? They need to have certain colors to help with their psychology. It's just like actually freaking insane that all of this research is going to be also used in that way for space travel. And that just like makes me nerd out even more, because for those of you guys that don't know, I'm super into like astronomy and space travel and space research in general. I just like read up on it for fun. So I'm now like really intrigued by all of this. I'm going to try to do a deep dive and actually find like legitimate research and recent takeaways, because a lot of the stuff that I was looking into, I don't know if it was like super current. One of the docs I watched was like clearly from like the early 2000s. So all that to say, I'm going to go on even more of a deep dive, but I just thought all of these facts were like too interesting not to share. I hope that you learned something from this and enjoyed today's episode of me just like nerding out on Marty Supreme in Antarctica. So I hope you have a fun week and a nice weekend. Stay safe, and I'll see you next week. Bye.